Welcome, everyone, to the Ocean and Coastal Impacts of Carbon Waste Injection in the Gulf of Mexico Deep Dive. My name is Paige Powell. I'm a policy manager at Commission Shift, and we are working to transform oil and gas oversight by building public support to hold the Railroad Commission of Texas accountable to its mission in a shifting energy landscape. And we do this for the people of Texas, for future generations, for the energy industry, for we consider equity and all the best things. We believe in good government, which is maybe a little bit of a radical idea, but we're just trying to look out for everyone around. And the reason we're doing this webinar on coastal injection in the Gulf of Mexico is because of the recent awards, leases by government agencies, the Texas GLO, the General Land Office, to do carbon waste injection in state-owned submerged lands. And as many of you may know, like the Outer Continental Shelf is a little bit, there are about 80,000 legacy wells in the Gulf of Mexico, from my understanding, because there's always been a lot of activity there. And so now, to put that carbon waste injection back into the Gulf may have some long-term consequences. And now that it's June, it's World Ocean Month, and this Saturday is, I think, World Oceans Day. We just wanted to really highlight the importance of our oceans, the importance of our Gulf. This is sort of part 3, of this water series of the impacts of carbon capture and storage on water and different ecosystems. So with that, I just want to welcome our guest speakers today. We have a couple of really outstanding folks with us. We've got Scott Eustis from Healthy Gulf, and he's going to speak to many different things over there. And then we've got Pate out of New Orleans. We're gonna give him a warm Texas welcome here to our and then Peyton out in Ingleside down by Corpus Christi is going to speak to what they're doing over there at Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch Association, and looking at carbon injection further south on the coast. After that, we'll do a Q&A for everyone. But without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Scott. Then I'll stop sharing my screen. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Paige. Thanks to Commission Shift. Thanks to all of the partners across the world, really. The slides I'm going to present, I put a link in the chat. And here we go. I have a bit of a map too. This is just this presentation. I'm calling from a lot of sources, so if I didn't cite your organization, I'm sorry. It's a rapidly evolving situation, but IEFA, Center for International Environmental Law, the Empower Group, Bullard Center, of course, Commission Shift, and many others have just been rapid fire emails trying to get a sense of what all is going on in our ocean here, the Gulf of Mexico on the southern coast of the United States. And it's a lot of waste. We want to stop wasting our Gulf. The map you're looking at in yellow are areas in state waters of the Gulf and very connected estuaries that are leased for carbon waste injection, as well as outer continental shelf, federal Gulf of Mexico waters, leased for carbon waste injection in the last 3 lease sales, 257, 259, and 261. It's over 1 million acres just in the federal ocean, and probably 1.7 million all combined. It's a lot of ocean that's been leased very rapidly for dumping this waste. And so we're still trying to get a handle on it. So that map is there. I wish there were more metadata, but if you're concerned with your area, you can use the map. So in yellow are the carbon waste injection areas, and very briefly, those dots are orphan wells in Texas and Louisiana and idle iron in the offshore. And that this not only complicates doing injection, but it's a signal that the industry is not interested in paying workers to clean up the most basic of waste. It costs a lot of money to operate in the Gulf. It costs a lot of money to monitor the air in the Gulf. It costs a lot of money. So it's going to cost a tremendous amount of money to monitor these subsurface formations in the ocean. And we're concerned with the companies do not seem to be prepared. Our regulatory apparatus is not prepared. If we can't even clean up old wells, how are we going to track these CO2 plumes? And I'm also going to talk a little bit about environmental justice today. That's the map. Yeah, I think I said a bit of this. You know, we have to stop wasting our Gulf. Very suddenly after the IRA was passed, Healthy Gulf had stopped Exxon from leasing a lot of this in 257, but the IRA commanded that sale go through. And then we saw more in sale 259. Over 25% of those two lease sales were just this Exxon Mobil grab of the ocean for carbon waste injection. It's roughly 220 lease blocks offshore. There's fewer leases in state waters, but those leases are much bigger. It's a lot of ocean. For perspective, the National Park Service leases 2.5 million acres for conservation, right? So just very quickly, we're approaching that conservation number for carbon waste injection. And the companies you've heard of, most of them, some maybe not, Exxon, Chevron, Talos, Air Products, and the LNG companies like Venture Global LNG, and also Cox Operating. It's one that we will have a petition on soon. Cox is kind of like a baby Chevron. We don't know how much is going to be injected because we still don't have a lot of permit applications even for these injection projects, but a lot of it's being funded by Treasury and DOE, and it's being funded as if it's going to be larger than we've seen in human experience. So we want to learn from where this has been tried in the ocean before. And what we've learned is that there's a lot of uncertainty, which again, it drives an operator to a larger and larger lease holdings, which is why they're getting so big. What's troubling from these different agencies, DOE, Treasury, EPA, Army Corps, and Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is that they're all saying this line of there's not environmental justice implications, which is completely absurd because we know from the era of drill baby drill and oil extraction in the Gulf, there are tremendous environmental justice impacts of getting the oil to the refineries. And it's the same pipeline rights of way that are now taking the CO2 from the refineries back out to the ocean. So it's those same communities that were impacted when we were drilling in the Gulf more. It's the same communities are going to be impacted. So that's something, Healthy Gulf, we need your help telling the agencies that there are huge environmental justice issues with this. There's compliance issues all over the place. And, you know, Paige asks about the environmental issues of releasing CO2 in the ocean. We have huge annual hypoxic zones. We have very large scale ocean acidification. I really hope that the scale of CO2 releases in the Gulf don't scale to the issues we have now, but it's definitely, we don't need that. You know, we don't need any additional chemicals that take away oxygen in the Gulf. Don't need the CO2, which becomes an acid to be released in the Gulf. And it sounds like that's going to be part of this process. So where are we now? This is a picture I took in 2017 of just a regular weekly methane release into the Gulf of Mexico in West Delta 30. This is from Energy 21 GOM. This is like one of those baby Chevrons. Chevron sold the thing to a low capitalized company, and they have a lot of upsets. on a weekly basis. This is happening. There's not a lot of enforcement. There's not a lot of monitoring. Basically, air permitting in the Gulf is just the company submits a plan. They say they're going to do a good job, and at the end of the year, they submit to BSEE, which is the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. They report that they complied with their plan. It's all spreadsheets. No one's actually monitoring air pollution out there. A 2016 rule would have required ambient air monitoring. We know how to do this. We know it's helpful, but that was then rescinded in 2017. I hope Healthy Gulf, we're going to continue to talk to Bessie about reestablishing that because we know how to do it. Oh, some scientists from University of Arizona, carbon mapper. So when they've flown over platforms like the one in my picture, they've found that the methane is about, it can be an order of magnitude larger than what's being self-reported by the industry. And that tracks. I mean, that's what we see with oil spills. Self-reporting is non-reporting. Self-reporting is under-reporting by an order of magnitude. So this was what was published in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. So, you know, and we know how to do air monitoring. And actually, the BP response showed us the best way to do air monitoring on the Gulf. This is Dr. Earthy Hernanz's paper published in 2021 on how to do it. And that's the best air monitoring we've ever had. It was not from EPA, not from the government, not from the CDC even, but from, as it was expensed as part of the BP response. And that paper should be a guideline on the statistical parameters for your sampling plan. So we know how to do it. We know what we need to do, but it isn't getting done. It's not all bad news out there. You know, this ship is good news, but it took time. This is the Cuvion Group vessel working to cap the oil leak in Mississippi Canyon 20. That's been going on for 20 years. There's no longer oil for 13 miles at this location. It's looking very clean. But they themselves, even though they are industry guys, they're concerned that, well, we just vent the methane and it's about a ton a day. Please, Healthy Gulf, make the Coast Guard lend the contract so we can plug these wells. So, you know, we have all these problems because industry doesn't want to hire people to fix the wells. And so we're very concerned then about some of the slippery fishes that we're hearing about, these CO2 plumes from Norway. So these are a couple of stories from CCS in the North Sea in Norway. It's the Equinor company, it's state-owned. It's much better regulated than the Gulf of Mexico in terms of labor and environment, and they've still had some problems. This is the Sleipnir A platform. It is a gas extraction platform, and in the blue box is a dedicated acid gas reduction unit that takes CO2 out of the gas. And then injects it right back into the same area. This was the 90s that this Sleipnir CCS project was initiated. And then there's Snowbit. But here we go. It's a whole rig. It's a whole rig with power needs and you know, pumping. This is not such a simple operation. It's a massive operation. They had it well surveyed. They had the formation. They even had a nice pancake geology where they could inject the CO2 into 8 layers. But what is it? Everyone has a good plan and until you get punched in the face. Yeah, every applicant has a great 3D model of the subsurface until you start injecting. And you know, injection can change the formation. In this case, they discovered a new layer that was at the top and it was closest to the water. And of course, the CO2 was the least dense and rushed into this new layer. And all of a sudden, the project was off their model and the densities were unaccountable. And, you know, it's the subsurface. You can't see it. It's a lot harder than monitoring air quality. you have to rely on seismic and these complicated surveys and models. So once the CO2 plume does move, and once it gets off the model, you have a lot of questions about density. You have to rely on different models. You have to do more surveys. And this was early in the game, so there were a lot of academics who participated in finding the CO2 plume as it migrated, but then they all disagreed about how dense it was and whether or not the project was performing as intended. So, you know, CO2 is a slippery fish. It's moving around down there. And when it moves, you lose the location. If you go off of the model, you might lose your certification. And that's even without the CO2 coming to the surface. And this is complicated stuff. The opposite kind of problem happened with the Snowvid injection. This was a land-based injection that used wells that were under the water. But when they started injecting, their model was way too conservative. The pressures were rising. They were trying to stuff the CO2 down hole, and all it was bringing back was pressure. So they realized that they could keep pushing and perhaps crack the formation. They didn't want to do that. So what they did instead was a second and third injection project. So what started off as, you know, their application was finished. They had a very complicated, amazing seismic survey and model. But when they started pushing the CO2 downhole, it wouldn't fit. And they had to drill 2 more projects and spent over $200 million to achieve their initial objective. So, you know, what do we see around Houston, the CCS hub, these uncertainties? You want to lease a lot because maybe you start one project and the one project becomes 3 and 4 injection projects because the formation isn't behaving like you expected. That's the kind of behavior we're seeing in the leasing off of Houston. So it's, you know, in red is the initial plan from Dr. Tip Meckel in 2020, and then in the yellow is the much bigger leases from Exxon and Chevron and BP west of Galveston. But that's not so great either, because Galveston is now surrounded by injection fields. And city of Galveston is an environmental justice community, and a vulnerable one, and we need to be talking about evacuation and notification. So how slippery is this fish in Texas? Back in 2006, University of Texas Austin had a study. How far away from the injection site do you have to survey to track this slippery fish? And in Texas, and in salt dome geology, I think, so this applies to Louisiana coastal areas as well, they found that the CO2 could slide 20 kilometers away from the initial injection, kind of uphill. Uphill in the subsurface in Texas would be to the northwest, right? As that map at the bottom shows. And in Louisiana, that would be to the north, right? Nicot recommended then that CO2 only be injected deeper than existing oil wells, but that's exactly what we don't see with Class 6. Class 6, the CO2, Class 6 is something of a deregulation. So in state waters, Class 6 rules hold. We don't know what rules hold for the federal waters yet, but we expect that the wells will be shallower than existing oil wells. Otherwise, we would have just kept it as a Class 1 hazardous well. But when you drill shallower than the existing boreholes, you know, you have a lot of orphan wells and unattended wells that will go through your plume. You have the potential for faulting to leak. And the projects, most of these projects around the world have failed. They fail because the variables get too much. They don't fail by volume, by the CO2 leaking into the air by volume, but the leaks that do happen are very dangerous for communities. So and all of these complications make the CO2 plume hard to track. So, like I said, a lot of the vision for what's happening off of Houston is coming from Tip Meckel's paper in 2020. You can see this was it. And Exxon and Chevron have followed that. Over in the eastern area in Louisiana, or I guess we're the Central Gulf, the applicants are not following that playbook, which is, the inconsistency is very troubling. Over in the central side off Grand Isle, it's Cox Operating just applied to DOE, say, give us money. We're just going to do this where we drill for oil. That is not, that seems to not be considering any of these lessons from the North Sea. So that's a different problem. We have a tremendous amount of wells going through the formations, and we have a lot of ongoing hazardous materials events. I have that well highlighted in the Northeast. That's a well that's been leaking for at least a year and a half, and probably since Hurricane Ida. It'll give you a headache if you go close to it. And you know, Louisiana cannot mobilize the resources to plug that thing, even though it is a explosive amount of methane leaking into the water in a high energy wave environment where a lot of fishermen work. And we're very concerned that a shrimper will be trawling at night or pushing wing nets at night and run into that thing. But the department does not have the capacity to deal with that. So it's in Louisiana. I feel like the story is we have all of these methane events. I showed you those bar charts earlier about how methane is 10 times as much as reported. A lot of that data is being driven by this geography. In blue and in yellow are different magnitudes of methane plumes coming out of the state waters and the federal waters on the shallow shelf in this area. And you see that one star in the Grand Isle leases where Cox is proposed to be doing the injection. So if we can't mobilize the workers to fix the existing leaks, are we gonna mobilize crews to do seismic surveys when the time comes? We really doubt that. But these bad ideas in Grand Isle are not driven by Tip Meckel. They're driven by the Department of Energy surveys. And again, the Department of Energy wants to get the yellow blobs to the green and red blobs. And then they say, well, there's no environmental justice issues, but you're going to have to put a pipeline to connect those things. BOEM saw that CCARB study and they responded with their own ocean planning, which deprioritized Grand Isle. The size of the orange bubbles is how many old wells are through the formation. So BOEM was kind of moving away from Grand Isle and said, why don't you go closer to Vermilion, where we don't have a coastal population and we don't have as many leaks. But DOE funded the feed for this pipeline, which has a very large environmental justice footprint. This is the old loop right away. It's African-American folks on the river and African-American, Native American, and low-income fishing folks closer to Grand Isle. And we really need cumulative impacts analysis in a few dimensions. I may be running out of time, so I might skip through this quickly, but it's a lot of wetlands impact. It's a lot of cumulative risk in areas where we don't have fire departments equipped with scuba equipment or like emergency vehicles that run on batteries so they can navigate their way through plumes. And these are some of the most polluted areas in Louisiana on this right of way, right? This is where we took the oil from the Gulf and we put it in the refineries. So we have people with a lot of bad lung health. The ammonia build out, which these are new build plants that will be sending CO2 to the Gulf and to other areas. We have 6 to 9 plants in 2 parishes alongside plastic build out. And so there's just a tremendous amount of pollution proposed in areas that are environmental justice communities, African American communities that cannot take it. This just shows a map of the increasing hazards. And you can see, since we don't really drill for oil in Louisiana so much, a lot of the increasing hazards are the pipeline corridors. And you may see St. James and our Cox Operating pipeline corridor that are very dark red. Again, this is high cancer risk areas. This is where the carbon capture plants are located, in the worst places. And risk. These ammonia and CO2 don't ignite, but it does spread asphyxiating plumes. And so, you know, that this is a Satartia event. That plume ran for half an hour to an hour, but the lack of oxygen persisted for 4 hours. And so Yazoo County responders and other responders from counties in Mississippi had to walk in for miles with their scuba masks to pull 40 people out of the asphyxiated plume, pull people off the ground, out of their cars, and get them to the hospital. And some of those people are on permanent disability. So we're going into areas that, you know, Jerry Briggs was kind enough to testify to the Louisiana legislature that you need to fund your fire departments. There's going to be a manpower shortage in dealing with these kinds of incidents. And wetlands, injection costs wetlands, pipelines hurts wetlands. Even when you install a pipeline in coastal Louisiana, it means that you're going to be digging in the wetlands constantly. So these are pipeline repair sites per block group in the coastal zone. And it just shows the redder areas are the areas planned for the CO2 pipelines. And the new bill too, it's just call it Hurricane CCS, because just the amount of excavation in the different proposed pipelines for CCS, which are in blue, notice that they fall in the same rights of way as the red, which is the current LNG proposals. Each of these is 3,000 to 4,000 acres of disturbance. Thankfully, since I made this slide, both Exxon Mobil and ConocoPhillips have moved away from some very destructive projects in the wetlands, but we still have 16 pipelines proposed. So this remains an issue where we need EPA and Army Corps to declare these significant impacts. And the pollution, this is that Pemex fire. I scribbled out the fire because I didn't want you to focus on the fire. I wanted you to focus on the boat. What we very recently heard from the insurers is that they are prepared to insure Exxon Mobil for Exxon losing the CO2 into the ocean. You know, that means Treasury would take their money back from the 45Q, and the insurance companies are signing contracts with Exxon for that. They're also signing contracts with Schwest. You know, they're signing contracts with the boat operators in case a vessel capsizes due to loss of buoyancy. That's I did not expect to hear that, but it does happen when you have these larger releases. You know, that fireboat can't get close to the fire. It may look like, oh, he's not being effective. That captain cannot get any closer without the boat sinking. So the insurance companies are preparing to insure the operators, but who is ensuring that our ocean isn't polluted like this? This all seems very, it's moving in a bad direction. And I'll sum up is that the various plans say we don't really need it on this scale. So join us. That QR code allows you to sign up with Healthy Gulf, and we're going to be sharing action alerts to DOE to stop funding for the Cox Operating project, action alerts to ask the Army Corps and EPA for significant impact determinations for the wetlands. And when BOEM issues their rulemaking, we really want a project like the Cox Operating project to be deselected. And with that, we are hiring in the Texas area and in the New Orleans area. So if you want to get in the Gulf and and do methane monitoring of a well like I am here, go to the link and let's talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, hopefully somebody take you up on that offer. That'd be a great positions, couple of them over there. So thank you so much for that. Peyton, please take it away. Take it away.
Okay, let me get this slide started. And then I'll share. Okay. Okay, can y'all see it okay? Okay, hi, yeah. My name's Peyton Campbell. I'm the Air and Science Monitoring Coordinator here, Air and Water Monitoring Coordinator here in Corpus Christi with Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch. And just to kind of get y'all oriented, you know, this is the city of Corpus Christi here. Right across the bay is Portland, and then Gregory, which is an EJ community. And then here's Ingleside, and then Ingleside on the Bay, which is where we're mainly headquartered. We were founded in 2019 to promote health, safety, quality of life for surrounding communities through research, education, communication, and action. The main cause for our founding was there in Ingleside on the Bay, right next door to it, there was an old Navy base that was decommissioned. And in 2019, Enbridge, a oil export terminal, was founded. And since their founding in 2019, they have now become the #1 oil exporter in North America. And so they're a Canadian company. And just some of the efforts we've done locally, we've done with academia and citizen science. We currently have air monitors. We've done a ammonia study, ozone studies. We did methane flyovers. We tried to show that the seagrass was dying out, which it is, but we worked with TAMU CC for that. We were working with currently University of Texas Arlington. In fact, they're coming down this weekend to install a new water sonde at our Texas State Aquarium and 3 new air monitors. We've done optical gas imagery studies, and that's just some of the citizen science and academia we've done locally. So this is Ingleside on the Bay. Enbridge, the #1 export terminal, and then Gibson, the #2 oil export terminal, are now proposing, well, Enbridge and Yara, a Norwegian company, are proposing an ammonia site. And that directly relates to carbon capture. They're going to need carbon capture to do the blue ammonia, which is supposedly clean ammonia. But they're using LNG to create ammonia, take the CO2 out, sequester it locally, get money for doing that sequestration, and then shipping that ammonia overseas. Because they can't, not only can they not afford the LNG over in Norway, but they also can't sequester it there because, you know, it's too expensive, and their laws are a little bit stricter, I guess. So this is what we're dealing with. We've got 4 ammonia facilities being proposed in our area. We've recently, with Ingleside City Council, we helped deny a objectionable use permit for Enbridge and Yara, but they are still plowing ahead trying to get this facility built up. This is Some of the fights that we're currently in, we are fighting 20 permit challenges for desalination facilities and air permits for industrial use all around San Patricio and Nueces County. And this is just a little bit more about that ammonia facility that will be using CCUS. It currently has 7 pipelines coming through to it, and they'll be adding more LNG pipelines and CO2 pipelines to help this ammonia facility. The proposed emissions in tons per year listed here, the CO2 equivalent, they're going to be emitting 3.3 million tons of CO2. And for this particular permit, for half a year, they're going to be venting everything. They're not going to be sequestering anything, or at least that's what they're proposing to do. And then after that point, they will be sequestering with a third party, which is currently unnamed. And that way they can excuse themselves from any liability. It'll be on that third party to sequester the CO2. Definitely not a clean project by any means. So right now, TCEQ, which is responsible for air permitting in the state of Texas, which has never denied an air permit ever, I think, in the history that they've been founded, has no air monitors whatsoever in San Patricio County. They have 4 in Nueces right across the bay, but there's no monitors other than self-reporting and some industry monitors that are in San Patricio. We've had some FLIR studies, some optical gas imagery. This is the Enbridge facility there in oops. Sorry, there should be a video. But basically what happens is at 2 o'clock in the morning, they start venting from that facility. And this is the same facility that will be trying to install an ammonia plant here. These are those 2 terminals. So they don't have a good history in our area. And then we also have a Cheniere facility, which is also expanding and will likely be tied into this CO2 pipeline. Popular slide here, just talking about the various ways that CO2 can escape. In our area in particular, they're studying a place near McCampbell Airport, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But its primary escape pathways there is these growth faults that are prominent all across the Gulf, and also abandoned wells all over the area. I mean, we're Texas. The drill baby drill mentality is prevalent, and some of these wells that are shown on the Railroad Commission's website, there's wells that don't even exist on that site. That we have old linen maps from the 40s that show wells that don't even exist on their radar. So, which we'll go into in a little bit. Once again, Tip Meckel, from his various proposals for this huge sequestration project. It's changed a little bit since then, but initially they were thinking of storing CO2 in our bay, and then also using enhanced oil recovery out in the King Ranch area. They may still be doing that. We never know what they're going to do with that until it's almost too late. They don't keep the community involved. In fact, their 1.5 came down and did a presentation at A&M Kingsville talking about their direct air capture project. It's going to be on the King Ranch. It's very large in scope, bigger than anything in the world right now. The current largest facility, I believe there's a new one being built still, but I believe Orca is the largest one currently. They capture and sequester 4,000 metric tons of CO2 annually. This project, they were proposing 1 million tons per year, which is outrageous increase in scale. Initially, we were optimistic about it because at the meeting they stated that they wouldn't be doing any point source capture. There'd be no pipelines. It would just be a standalone facility that they'd be sequestering there. And 1.5 is a subsidiary of Oxy. Then, not too long later, Enbridge, the company that's getting that ammonia plant or trying to get that ammonia plant, proposed a pipeline going right from their facility to that King Ranch direct air capture project. They're proposing 64 miles of CO2 transport, and they're looking for 2027 is when they're trying to get it completed. So, and look, Enbridge and Oxy Low Carbon Ventures, the company that said they would not be doing any sort of pipelines. In fact, a journalist, Alec Lunn, came down for Scientific American, was doing a CCUS article, and I went out to the Chapman Ranch property, which is adjacent to King Ranch, and we couldn't get on the King Ranch property. They didn't allow us to go on there, but one of the neighbors there already said he had signed an NDA, so he couldn't really go into details. But from what we understood, he already agreed to something, and he kind of hinted that he had already agreed to a pipeline going through his property there. And so they've already been getting right of ways and surface rights for this pipeline to go through. This is that Kingsville area now. As far as onshore sequestration, it's maybe one of the better sites, but you still have a ton of old wells around there. And whether they're orphaned or they've been plugged properly, the cement that is used to plug these wells is going to be eaten away by the CO2. And that's the escape path. If there's wells in the area, which in Texas, there pretty much always are going to be wells in the AOR if you're onshore, probably offshore too. And right now they've drilled 2 wells. They've got this Garcias IZM number 1 and 2, and they've basically put down plans for a 3rd one, so that they can test out, make sure the formations are what they expected. Kind of the catch-22 of sequestration projects is you've run a fine line between having enough data and then having too many wells in the area. So you've got to drill these new test wells, and they've drilled 2 now, and they're planning on this 3rd one. So they're moving forward with this project. And these they just got your typical Railroad Commission W1 approval as a test well, nothing with a Class 6. So they just went ahead and proceeded there. Going back to kind of Ingleside, this is Ingleside on the bay here. We've got Enbridge here, and then this is the McCampbell Airport. This area kind of got us started investigating CCUS as an organization, because we really hadn't heard about it. Even as a geologist, we hadn't heard much about it. We knew about EOR efforts, but that wasn't really any of our concern. We didn't focus on that at all until this project came around and they started talking about this McCampbell Airport. So we looked at it geologically, and there's a lot of problems. And hopefully this will not be considered as a viable sequestration area. They are studying it currently. They've been granted quite a bit of money to do that study. I believe it was $12 million they got to study these port-owned properties, the Port of Corpus Christi. So this is the proposed drill site with 3 test wells that they'll be drilling and to be subsequently monitor wells. But just going through that property with some old maps, you've got a giant old oil field on either side of that area, and you've got a huge growth fault coming through. So just a little geological nerding. So this is just a cross section of these wells that we have kind of going through this area. And you can see kind of what the geology does in that area. But the main issue is that there's a huge growth fault just going right through very within the AOR of that of the plume. The mudstone cap's also not that thick. It's only 300-400 feet thick. And so there's a ton of risks here, and basically every risk you could have, it kind of checks that box. And then Yeah, so this is that fault at the subsurface, and then it kind of comes all the way to the surface here. And you can even see kind of a ridge line on the surface and vegetation change from where that fault's coming to the surface. So it can migrate all the way up to the surface to residential areas and yeah, impact our community. And I think that's just shy of 15 minutes, and that is my presentation. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Peyton. That was excellent. I loved how both of y'all gave like sort of very like local specific examples, and me being in Houston, kind of in the middle of both of those. You know, I think it's the same thing. It's here, it's along the ship channel. Like Scott, you said something about Galveston being completely surrounded, and then that entire area between Galveston Bay and the border, and you've got all of this like Beaumont, Port Arthur. I mean, Port Arthur's already doing CO2, right? We know they've got oh, who's over there? Y'all help me out with their
I believe Air Products.
Air Products hydrogen. Thank you. The gray hydrogen. But they're like, oh, well, we can make it blue if we just, you know, use the CO2 that we capture for EOR. And then it's like carbon neutral or something. I'm sorry, I'm being facetious. It's low carbon at that point. So anyway, I would like to invite our guests, participants here to maybe add any questions that you have for our fantastic speakers in the chat. And I'm going to pull up my chat so I can see what's going on. But I was really interested in a couple of things. So we're talking about like CO2 leaking up through various pathways into the soil, into like groundwater, but being an asphyxiant, like it's my understanding that it's going to kill all of the microorganisms in the soil on its way up, right? At least the ones that like feed on oxygen or like need oxygen to live. But then if it's in the communities, like is there like a slow saturation that could asphyxiate people who live above that? Or I know we're definitely concerned about CO2 pipeline ruptures and those communities being impacted. That's probably one of the my biggest concerns with the whole thing. So if we could, if anybody wanted to maybe just speak to specific issues or anything sort of related to the community impacts that we would see with either a slow release over time or a major release.
Well, as far as the ecological impacts, I do know, yeah, that the soil acidity would go up, and at least as far as where that 1.5 facility is, the Oxy Venture, just north of that is what's Chapman Ranch, and it's a huge cotton farming community, and so I'm sure it would be devastating to their crops there locally, and then. Also, one of the big things about that, the big release, kind of like what Scott was saying, why those firefighters had to walk so far is that those plumes and that saturation of CO2 kill any gas-powered engines. So even if emergency responders want to come and respond, they really can't unless they've got specialized electrical equipment that can make that's not combustion. I mean, that was one of the scariest things about that pipeline rupture, and they were very fortunate where it ruptured and how the plume migrated, that there were no communities right there. I mean, that pipeline, if it ruptured anywhere else, you know, there was plenty of places which it would have devastated that area. And then we're also prone to hurricanes, just like Houston. I mean, that's well, shoot, the entire Gulf of Mexico, right? You never know. And you know, any of those ruptures, now you're adding that on top of all of the damage from a hurricane. And it's just you know, the pipelines themselves are a concern. Not to mention, yes, our government, you know, we're giving all this money to these corporations, and they can't even really guarantee that they're going to do what they've said. And then that's the financial impact is awful. But then, yes, the health impact is a huge concern in our communities.
Yeah, I've been trying to wrap my head around it. We've read the GAO reports and there's reports from the North Sea about the projects failing, and the volumes of CO2 involved are so massive, and they're failing, and that's separate from whether or not it escapes to the surface, right? But even if a small amount escapes to the surface, it creates a big problem for communities. So I've been trying to separate them in my head a little bit, where, you know, the Satarsha incident is incredibly disturbing for a rural community. But that's different from the projects failing. So you'll hear industry people. I heard someone from an ammonia plant say it this weekend, like, well, you know, we only have the possibility of 1%, you know, leakage. 1% leakage on the volumes that are being put through 24-inch pipelines is quite significant to a community. And even the SCADA systems, the electronic pipeline monitoring systems don't pick up most of Danbury's leaks. So it ends up being the fire departments that have to detect the leaks, report it to the agencies, and then deal with the response. So there's kind of like two different scales that I'm thinking at and trying to communicate when we talk about leaks. But then I heard from my friend Michael in the audience that the insurance people are thinking big leaks if they're considering insuring vessels against sinking in the plume. That I have not been able to put my head around that kind of volume of material entering the ocean and what it would do, but it would not be good. It would not be good for the sea life. Even these methane leaks cause loss of oxygen from chemical oxygen demand. So we've long been pestering the agencies that methane should be regulated as water pollution because the chemical, I think it was the EcoGig researchers in 2012, 2013, they were actually able to respond to a methane leak with an oxygen sensor. You know, again, because of these BP penalty monies funding scientists in the Gulf. That was the first time we had oxygen sensors in the water column that were there fast enough to respond to a methane leak into the water column and detected a loss of oxygen. So even the things we have now are lowering the oxygen in the water column. It's not good. It's not helping.
Point taken. Yeah, it's not good. There's a lot of pathways for escape. So it's not good for the water, it's not good for the Gulf, it's not good for the sea life. And that has sort of ecosystem impacts all the way up the food chain and up the coast and up the estuaries and the riparian corridors and all of that, right? But really for the people, and I kind of want to go back to pipelines a little bit and like coastal impacts and even underground storage being like both in the water, offshore and onshore, and a lot of that land shifting and like hurricanes. And I mean, when I talk about this in West Texas, it's like, you know, in an era of increasing drought and extreme weather where the land is cracking and spreading apart, you're seeing that infrastructure and land, but the opposite is happening, right? It's too much water on the coast and I know Scott, you make that point often, and Peyton, I see you nodding along. Did y'all want to add any more color or information to, you know, it just doesn't make any sense
I
to me.
I can't speak to Corpus or West Texas very much, but here in Louisiana, I think we've, you know, Louisiana, the peak of drilling was in the 70s, right? A lot of the coastal wells I think we went out with the boat captain and he said, "Oh yeah, that's one of the newer wells from the 70s." You know, and still the oil industry does not hire workers to what's called decommission the old wells. They have been required to, but they kind of go to the government and say, make us, you know. So what's happened, so we've lost drilling in Louisiana in the 80s. It was a long time ago. And then offshore, it was really in 2008 where we, you know, drill baby drill was 2008 presidential slogan, right? We've had the geological conditions of the Gulf since 2008. The easy oil is gone. It's done. So you do get the super deep plays. That's what gets leased generally in these lease sales. So Shell and Chevron are leasing deeper and deeper. I think BP is doing its deepest play ever in the next couple of years. But the industry has abandoned the shelf, right? Especially once fracking arises. And rather than hire Louisianans to decommission the wells, you know, they drug all our Cajun folks over to Eagle Ford Shale, and a lot of us became Texans because the jobs left Louisiana and they left the Gulf. And if you look at the economics of mobilizing drilling equipment, which is remediation equipment, right? To plug these wells, you have to drill them and pump cement down hole. You have to hire oil workers to do this environmental cleanup. The economics of even mobilizing a boat into shallow water, that's 6 times as much as it costs driving some trucks out to Midland. And so the industry has just run from operating in the water because of the basic economics of operating in the water. So we're very skeptical that the industry is going to have the capacity to respond to these slippery fish, to these plumes that are going to migrate and the plumes that are going to require a lot of geological work and workovers and new monitoring wells being drilled. I just don't think the industry really wants to hire the workers. I mean, since the 80s, it's all been about automation and labor saving. So the industry doesn't want to hire Louisiana to do the jobs that we already have. So I'm skeptical that we'll have the capacity to respond to these new problems.
Point well taken. I don't know, Peyton, if you had anything else you wanted to share kind of on that point.
Well, I do know there was a State of the Port address recently that we attended as a group, and they did also say that they were looking offshore. They couldn't give us a specific area, but that map that Scott shared earlier, it does look like that area off of Mustang Island is kind of where they're looking at. And yeah, just the costs associated with that are it's not going to be covered by the sequestering reimbursement that the government's providing. So how they're going to come up with those funds, I don't know. And what happens when those funds run out? You know, I mean, politics being what they are, those funds are finite right now, and they may not get renewed. So are we going to be stuck with more just industrial facilities just rotting away in our community? We've got multiples in our community already, old tanks just rusting away, sitting around, and are what's still in those tanks, you know, just whatever hazards that are remaining. Another issue we have in Texas is mineral rights versus surface rights. Kind of, I didn't really go into it, but when you pump the CO2 down there, it creates they're wanting to pump it into these saltwater formations, and it creates these carbonic acid lakes, basically underneath the surface. And, you know, people in Texas love their mineral rights. They love their oil, but they're only requiring surface rights right now. So they're considering it a pore space similar to like a saltwater disposal well. But saltwater disposal wells don't increase the well cost by, I think, 6 times. So if anyone did want to get to any oil that's there, any mineral landowner should be concerned, because they're now, it's a legislative issue, because now if there is any oil there, they've decreased the value of it, because to get to it, you're now having to use a specialized pipe to get there. I believe it's 6 times the cost of regular drill pipe, and you're having to use specialized cement that won't degrade from the carbonic acid. And it's cost prohibitive now. So that's another issue that people that are pro-industry, pro-oil still need to be concerned about this, because a lot of surface rights do not correlate to mineral rights in Texas. You've got families that have 100 and something heirs that own the mineral rights, and then you have one surface owner usually, and they could have no relation whatsoever to the mineral right owners. So people should be concerned, even from a financial standpoint. I mean, if that's how we need to fight this and appeal, that's another concern in our community, that I don't think people realize. If the surface, they have no rights as of now, even though they have mineral rights, they don't have a right compared to the surface right owners when it comes to sequestration. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, that was some, oh, go ahead.
Even in Louisiana, minerals are tied to the surface, but Professor Hall at LSU has written a paper on weakening that, allowing CO2 trespass. Is it trespass on your minerals if the pressure front pressurizes the saltwater formation under your land? These are legal questions that the legislature is debating, arguing about, and that's what they care about. A lot of the legislature doesn't want the CO2 to stop future oil drilling, and it's a fascinating conflict. But I think what the legislation that's passed, I need to review it, but basically communities in Louisiana living next to these things, you could be 8 miles away. You might be forced to be part of the unit, or you might be very strongly encouraged to be part of the unit. And so you might have mineral rights, but those rights may not get you much. You might get a $5 check and some impacts that won't pay for the impacts to your drinking water wells. And so, and I don't think people are prepared for how far away from the injection the units are going to have to be. They're going to have to be big units. So, yeah.
Yeah, we saw that last legislative session in Texas as well. Limited bills proposed for limited liability in the event of an unintended plume migration, which would limit access to minerals or contaminate underground source of drinking water, or be released to the subsurface and have impacts to communities. There was a clause about non-economic damages not being counted. I mean, the lawyers are well aware of the risk associated with these projects, and it's my understanding that that's why they haven't taken off in the last 50 years. Oh, we've been doing it for so long, we know what we're doing. Well, then why hasn't it gotten any cheaper or gotten any better, right? And why haven't you had private funders, investors in this? Why did it take a government subsidy to move things forward, right? Because it's not a good project. They're bad projects. They're going to lose money, they're going to hurt people, and it's a waste of our time when we're trying to fight the climate crisis, right? There's supposed to be climate investments, and it's not. So anyway, one more time, we're going to invite folks to ask a question. I know we're after the hour, but we still have another 10 minutes. Oh, I'm going to share my screen real quick while anybody thinks of a final question. Y'all were talking about, both of you, I think, said some version of the industry wants wants government to make them do it. Like we need the government to make this happen. And we just know that in Texas, the government hasn't been doing that, right? The Railroad Commission we got the most orphan wells and abandoned and unplugged wells. I mean, like, government's not doing it. So this prospect of the Railroad Commission getting authority over Class 6 injection wells, which are like going to be the huge volumes we're talking about, high pressure, high consequence wells, it just seems absurd. Not a good idea. So I'm going to try to share my screen again because I can do that. I am a tech whiz, believe it or not. And so we've been working as the Texas Carbon Capture and Storage Community Advocacy Coalition for a couple of months, a year, a while now. But we have this petition to keep primary enforcement authority for Class 6 injection wells in the hands of the EPA instead of the Railroad Commission of Texas. So if you feel compelled, please sign that petition and help us protect everyone from carbon waste injection. So with that, I think I'm gonna invite SJ to close us out, or there's a question. Where can we see a map of Class 6 injection wells waiting for approval in Louisiana?
In Louisiana. Louisiana has a map at the LDENR website. Give me 1 second and I could put it in the chat. It's Laura Sori in the LaSalle building in Baton Rouge that maintains the application list. Give me just 1 second and I can get you that. EPA is still in charge of Texas, so I don't know if they have a map or just a list on the EPA website, but EPA is upgrading their website and may have a map for Texas soon. BOEM there will have to be a rulemaking. Currently, it's not allowed to inject carbon dioxide for storage. So we'll probably not have a map until that rulemaking comes out, which could be up to a year. Could be later this year, it could be up to a year. But I put the contact information for the Louisiana map, as well as the geologist in the Department of Energy and Natural Resources in the chat. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both of you, Scott and Peyton, for sharing your incredible, your excellent work with us and knowledge. It's an important issue and I'm glad we all made time for it. So we appreciate your contributions and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.